Hey there, fellow travelers. Mark here with Wolters World, and today we're in Vancouver, British Columbia, having a great time here on the west coast of Canada. And today what we're going to talk about are some of the differences between the U.S. and Canada, because I know for a lot of travelers and tourists, they think, what's the difference between Canada and the U.S.? There's so many things that are similar. And we actually have a video that goes over things that the U.S. and Canada do the same, but we're not going to focus on that here. Today we're going to talk about are the differences between the U.S. and Canada that travelers should know before they come here so they can have a great time if they're going to Canada, the U.S., or they're crossing back in borders in Niagara and things like that, all right? Now, I'll get the basic stuff out of the way first before we get into like the fun differences, okay? First things first, let's talk about, things like kilometers versus miles, okay? In the U.S., they use miles. Here in Canada, they use kilometers, so it's the metric system versus the imperial system. For those of you who don't know, about 150 kilometers would be about 100 miles. So when you're traveling, so when you look at the street signs, okay, the speed limit signs, you cross the border, it'll go kilometers per hour in Canada. 100 kilometers per hour on the highway. And then when you get in the U.S., it's 65 miles per hour. So another thing is when you're getting gas, you're buying products. In the U.S., we use gallons, okay? So versus liters in Canada. And so if you're wondering, a gallon is 3.75 liters. So when you're getting gas, you might think how does my tank only hold 16 liters? Oh no, that's 16 gallons, okay? So it's a lot more on that. Another difference is here in Canada, they use Celsius. In the US, they use Fahrenheit. And so it's kind of funny because I think this kind of goes into the perpetual stereotype that Canada's always cold. I mean, it's not always cold, people. Just so you know, it's not a winter wasteland here in Canada all the time, all right? Now, when you look at the Celsius versus Fahrenheit, for example, it's a beautiful day today. It's in the 20s in Celsius. You tell an American it's in the 20s, they're thinking it's below freezing and I'm going to die. All right, so it's funny when you talk to Canadians, they'll say, oh, it's a beautiful 20-degree day today. And our stereotypes of Canada, if it's all polar bears and snow, I guess 20 degrees Fahrenheit would be warm? No. So it's Celsius versus Fahrenheit here. Other differences, in the U.S., there's a president that runs the country. Here in Canada, there's a prime minister that runs the country. There's 50 U.S. states. There's 10 provinces and 3 territories here in Canada. Those kind of things. Now, that's how I want to start. Just those are the basic things, all right? Now let's get into more of the fun things. Let's go back to that gallon versus liter thing. And it has to deal with the milk. How you get your milk in the U.S. versus Canada is slightly different, okay? In the U.S., you get a gallon jug of milk, 3.75 liters of milk. Now, I know I've seen people from all over the world come and they see these big milk jugs in the U.S. fridges, and they're like, how would you ever drink that much milk in your life? Well, we do, and that's how we buy it in big old gallons, okay? In Canada, you buy it in a liter bag. I've seen people that they buy the milk in a liter bag, and you're like, what do I do? Because if I cut the bag and I put it down, it'll just all leak out. Look, if you're coming here and you're buying milk in a bag, there's a jug, and you put the bag in the jug, and then you snip the corner off it and pour it out. Very simple. But that is one of the things that kind of throws people off the first time, especially if you're getting like an Airbnb or VRBO or whatever. When you're coming to Canada, you might find this weird-looking jug. Well, what's this for? That's for your milk bag, okay? So that's the difference there. Next thing I want to talk about is the money. Look, both in Canada and the U.S., they use the dollar, but it's Canadian dollar and U.S. dollar. In the U.S., you have the monochromatic greenback, the green dollar. Whereas here in Canada, you have the multicolored plastic-based, Canadian dollar. I find prices, honestly, are about the same. Neither place is more expensive, less expensive. I mean, housing's different, okay? But in general, I find coming to Canada is like traveling in the U.S. for prices. So not too expensive either way. But one thing I do find sad about the differences in the currencies here, in Canada, you can't wish on a lucky penny because they don't have pennies in Canada. They got rid of them. So when you're going around in the U.S., you'll see pennies on the ground because people are like, man, I don't need that. But no, you pick it up for good luck, all right? And you make a wish with it and throw it in the wishing well and things like that. Here in Canada, the coins are actually worth something, right? The loonie, the $1 coin, and the toonie, the $2 coin, are worth something. Whereas in the U.S., man, our change isn't really worth too much. So that is one difference. Pay attention to your coins in Canada. The U.S., it's just a bunch of change in your pocket. Then the fourth difference I want to talk about are the people. Look, both in the U.S. and Canada, the people are fantastic, friendly, helpful, kind, nice. You can have a great time. However, I do find the Canadians in general to be a bit nicer and a bit more helpful than Americans, but both of them you'll have a great time with. It's no big deal. In terms of things you should know about the people, if you get invited to somebody's house in Canada, take your dang shoes off, okay? Now in the US, it's hit and miss. If you're like in the north, like Minnesota and stuff, you take your shoes off most of the time. If you're in the south, you don't take your shoes off. In general, I mean, for example, my best friend who I travel with, he's been with me, we've been doing trips together for years now. I've known him for years. I've never once have I seen him take his shoes off in my house. I take them off all the time, but he never does, okay? And that's one thing that is different. Feel free to wear your shoes in the US and in Canada, man, make sure you take those off, all right? Some other differences of the people, I know a lot of people make fun of the Canadian accent, or people make fun of like a Boston accent in the US and things like that. The accents, the strength of the accents in the US and Canada, both have come down a lot over the years as the country's been mixing up more. So don't be surprised if you don't hear too many A's or a boots and stuff like that. You're not going to hear that so often. Occasionally you will. Like buddy, you'll hear buddy a lot more here. In Canada, you'll be everybody's buddy at least once when you're here. In the US, they say like a lot. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you know what I mean? You hear that in the US. So like our key word difference, buddy in Canada, like in the US, all right? And there are some words that are different. I mean, nothing really too big, in the US we say, well, we gotta go to the bathroom. In Canada, you say I gotta go to the washroom. But in general, you're not gonna have any difficulties with English in either country because it's not like England versus, Highland, Scotland differences in English. It's pretty much all the same here, so you'll be okay with that. There's a few spelling differences, but nothing too big. The fifth difference I have for you has to deal with pedestrians. Yes, I know those are still people, but I want to move into a specific type of person in the US and Canada, and that is the pedestrians. Here in Canada, pedestrians have the right of way. They know they have the right of way. The cars know they have the right of way, that the pedestrians do. The buses know that the pedestrians have the right of way, and they'll get in trouble if anything happens to those pedestrians. So the pedestrians are like, screw you, I'm walking across, bus, and they stop. No problem, no one honks, no one yells, stuff like that. Well, not all the time, okay? But in the US, you might have a green light. There might not be any cars coming, and you have the walk sign going for you. Man, you still look both ways the entire time, and you run across as fast as you can. Because in the US, it doesn't matter, it seems like. If the pedestrians have the right of way or not, it's kind of dangerous crossing the street, okay? So do pay attention when you cross the street in the US. I mean, pay attention anywhere, but it's a little bit more laissez-faire here in Canada with crossing the street than the US, where it's like take your life into your own hands sometimes. Now, the sixth difference I have for you has to deal with service. Now, both countries have very good service. Both countries have tipping, and both countries have tax added on, okay, when you buy stuff. But in terms of service, the biggest difference that I found between service in the US and service in Canada is how you pay your bill when you go out with friends, all right? Now, here in Canada, my buddy and I are traveling around and we're getting our bills and they come automatically. Okay, here's your bill, here's your bill. We can swipe it differently. They have the credit card thing. It's already separated. I can tip my part. He can tip his part. It's no problem. And they're totally cool with that. In the US, if you ask for them to split the bill, they're like, oh man, math, I can't do math. Oh no, there's no way we can split the bill. I'm like, we have technology that will send us to the moon and Pluto, and you can't figure out how to split a $10 tip between two people and two credit cards? It's quite frustrating, okay? So that's why Canada's awesome, and I think that's one of the reasons why Canadians stay friends and are so friendly, because think about it. In the US, when you have to split a bill with friends, you're like, who ate that? Who ate this? And you always have that cheapskate friend that ate like 3/4 of the food but said, oh, I only had water. Those kind of people, oh, they get away with that stuff in the US and they're not your friends anymore. Where in Canada, oh, no, we can call you out. Look, I'm paying for my stuff. That was your stuff. And they pay because it can get separated. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why these Canadians are so much nicer, because they've been able to keep their friendship, because cheap, friends don't cause problems, all right? So that is one thing I do like. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about in terms of differences is maple syrup and our perception of maple syrup. In the US, maple syrup is awesome on pancakes, waffles, and French toast. That's it. In Canada, maple syrup is a way of life. I had pizza that had maple syrup on it the other day. I'm not kidding with you. They put maple syrup on that pizza. Now, that's not normally how you would make pizza. It was a special pizza, but still, it got me thinking, what are all the ways they use maple syrup around here? In Canada, your mints might be maple syrup flavored, okay? We had candy, there's salmon candy flavored, the sweetness was maple syrup. You're gonna see it a lot of places. You're gonna be able to buy it all over the place, and it is fantastic. And you should buy it when you are here, because oh my God, it's so good. But the thing is, in the US, I mean, we joke about, oh, maple syrup in Canada, ha ha ha, but really it is a big deal here. Whereas the US, yeah, I have my pancakes and I move on, okay? Now, the eighth difference between the US and Canada comes down to our relationship between hockey and football, okay? Now, in Canada, hockey is a religion and football is a fun sport that people watch and play. In the US, football is a religion and hockey is a sport that people like to watch and play. Totally different. I mean, hockey night in Canada is huge. Monday Night Football in America is huge. Fantasy football. People are talking about football in the US all year round. Here in Canada, they talk about hockey all year round. So you have these differences. So we each have our passionate sport and we like the other sport and vice versa, okay? Now, the ninth thing I have to talk to you about are the differences between two of the most iconic brands for each of these countries. The difference between Tim Hortons here in Canada and Starbucks in the US. Now, both of these are everywhere. I mean, we have jokes. You'll see people with Starbucks. There's a Starbucks across from a Starbucks that's down the corner from another Starbucks in the US. When you're in Canada, it will seem like there's a Tim Hortons across from a Tim Hortons that's down the street from another Tim Hortons. That is one thing they're very similar at. They're both everywhere. However, going in and experiencing a Starbucks versus a Tim Hortons is totally different. I always say Tim Hortons is like your friend. It's everywhere you want them to be. They have what you need. If I need some little, we call them donut holes, but 10 bits, or I want a nice donut or a sandwich or something like that, my friend's gonna help me out. He's got some coffee, some drinks, it's nice stuff. Nice place to sit down, relax. It's totally cool, totally not pretentious. Awesome. Starbucks, yes, they have snacks, they have the coffees and stuff like that, and they are everywhere, but you don't have the same feel at a Starbucks as you have at a Tim Horton. And what's cool is if you're gonna be driving, because man, here in Canada, the drives are really, really long. A lot of the gas station stops and stuff like that will have a Tim Hortons in there, and you can chill out and relax there and not feel like I should have an iPad and an iPhone and all this other stuff going at the same time, like you kind of do with that feeling at a Starbucks. So it is kind of different that way. And the 10th little difference I have between the US and Canada actually comes down to the drinking age. Now, the thing is both countries will ask you for ID if you look young, okay? I know here in BC, they have like warnings out there that says, if you look like you're under 30, we might ask you for 2 IDs, not just 1, but 2. And the thing is in the US, it's like, if you look under 40, we're gonna ask you for an ID. So when they don't ask you for an ID, I'm like, man, am I looking that old now? You have that feeling. But here in Canada, the drinking age is 19. Okay, in the US, the drinking age is 21. And they're both pretty strict on keeping people that shouldn't be drinking and shouldn't be smoking and stuff like that. They do keep those pretty strict. So if you are under 21 in the US, or you're under 19 in Canada and you're visiting, don't try to get alcohol and stuff like that. You will get in trouble. I don't want anybody to get in trouble. I want you to have a great time here, whether you're in Canada or the US. They're both fantastic places. They both have amazing nature to see, great people, amazing food, all kinds of fun stuff to do.